Colossians chapter 2 verse 3 tells us that Jesus Christ is the fulfillment of all wisdom and knowledge. Welcome to The Reconciled Mind, the podcast where faith, science, history, archaeology, and personal testimony come together to reveal the full image of the invisible God. Each and every week on the Reconciled Mind podcast, we aim to bring you engaging content in order to encourage good discussion within the Church of Jesus Christ today on various issues that are present in our society, and the opinions that are expressed in this program are owned solely by those said individuals who express said opinions, and we also just want to share what the Lord put on our heart each and every week as inspired by the Word of God. All right, everybody, welcome to The Reconciled Mind. Today is going to be an awesome episode because I actually have a little bit of a wingman, which I'll introduce in a second. But in today's episode, we're going to be talking about a controversial topic in today's society, the issue of social justice versus biblical justice. So, Galatians 3:28 says, There is no Jew or Greek, slave or free, male and female, since you are all one in Christ Jesus. So, we're going to be examining what's really at stake here in today's society. Is social justice in direct contradiction of biblical justice? Do they intersect in any way? We're going to be examining that in today's episode. And I get the privilege and honor to actually introduce one of my all-time greatest friends and brothers in Christ. He's my championship chess partner in a league that we run, and he's been a good Bible study teacher along my side for as many years as I can count. Good decade or more. We've been brothers in Christ for a long time. I would like to introduce none other than the awesome brother Cecil Rhodes. Cecil, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Doing good.
Good. You excited for today's show?
Oh yeah, I'm definitely excited.
Absolutely. It's going to be an awesome show, everyone. So we're going to go ahead and get right into it. So Cecil, have you ever wondered what the definition of social justice and biblical justice basically is or are?
Yeah, I've often wondered about the definition of it.
Well, let's see here. Well, I'm bringing up a definition of social justice right now as we speak. So according to Google's dictionary that comes up, social justice is defined as justice in terms of the distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within a society. Now, most people would immediately look at that and think that has some kind of connotation of socialism or communism, but of course there's a lot more than meets the eye. I actually took the liberty to bring up some Bible verses too to talk about what the biblical definition of justice is. So according to, let's see, where's that scripture? I had it up here just a few seconds ago.
Galatians 3:23.
What does Galatians 3:23 say?
No, I was asking if that was the same passage that you were just looking up a few seconds ago.
Well, actually, no. I have one, Psalm 82:3, which says, "Give justice to the weak and the fatherless, maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute." That's Psalm 82:3. Isaiah 1:17 also says some interesting definition of God's brand of justice. It says, "Learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, and please the widow's cause." That's actually really interesting. And then...
It's a great idea.
No, it's okay. But then in Luke 11:42, it says, "But woe to you, Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and every herb, and neglect justice and the love of God. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others." So, kind of examining those scriptures, do you think that, I mean, first, what do you think of social justice when you hear that word? What comes to mind?
When it comes to social justice, there's a couple of things that you could say that kind of comes to mind. Like for example, social justice, like everybody wants fair unity, like equal rights, basically. Also, just to be heard in a civilized manner, of course, but also just to be heard. That's what I think of when it comes to social justice. Like
Sure.
Also just like being fair and fair, accurate, impartial. Like you're kind of like neutral, but at the same time, like you're trying to be as understanding as you can be.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of similarities between social justice and the biblical definition of justice, and hopefully to everyone out there who's listening, in today's episode we're going to jump right in and unpack this, and we're going to be talking about 4 different categories of the issue of defining social justice and biblical justice. First, we're going to be talking about a brief history and summary of the civil rights movement to the present in terms of how justice has manifested across the ages, whether it be social justice or biblical justice. In segment 2, we're actually going to be talking about the film called 13th and the age of mass incarceration and the events surrounding the unlawful arrest of Kalief Browder. And we're also going to be talking about, in the third segment of the show, the matter of critical race theory in the 1619 Project. In the last segment of the show, we'll be talking about the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests that have occurred across the past year against racial injustice. So today is going to be an awesome show. You don't want to miss it. We'll be right back. All right, everyone, welcome back to the Reconciled Mind. So I've got my brother in Christ, Cecil, with me on the show today. So in this segment of the show, we're going to proceed in talking about the civil rights movement to the present. So Cecil, I wanted to ask you just a couple questions, because you're of African American descent, and I've been wanting to hear your perspective on this matter for a while, because we've seen so many things in the news about social injustice and all sorts of different things related to the subject matter. But the first question I wanted to ask you: what do you feel were the biggest gains from the civil rights movement for African Americans?
Just basically, like they wanted, like not only did they want to be heard, but they wanted to be treated right. They also wanted the same opportunities that the white person had, like voting rights, working the same job, making the same money, basically doing what they can do, if not more. Like basically living the American dream.
Sure. And do you feel to a great extent that the civil rights movement made great gains in that respect?
I would definitely agree to an extent, yeah.
All right. And in what ways do you feel that the civil rights movement embodied Christian values? Like, when you look at the history of the civil rights movement, where do you see Christian principles come into play? Like, what comes to mind there?
In the movie Selma, where Martin Luther King was walking across the bridge in Alabama, if I remember correctly, and they were walking, and of course, you got like, I think there had to be at least over 100,000 people with Martin Luther King, and you got the entire town of Alabama like right there, and they were walking, and they were ready for them, but Martin Luther King stopped, and when I first saw it, because it took me by surprise a little bit. But in my head, I'm going like, why did he stop? And I'm like, oh yeah, because God has something else in mind. So he stopped, he prayed, and even though he was almost there, he could have kept on going. Instead, he turned around. This is more like God didn't exactly have this in mind, so we're going to head back. And I thought that was like really interesting, because they were ready for a fight. They were just ready to talk in a civilized manner. So it was more of like, we're not going to fight, and if you're ready for a war, we're going back.
Absolutely, that's a very good perspective. I would definitely say some things that I would say in terms of Christian principles that were present during the Civil Rights Movement was Dr. Martin Luther King's advocacy for taking a stance of nonviolence. Just like, of course, Jesus Christ himself, he didn't advocate for fighting with the sword or anything or any type of physical violence, but he and the disciples changed the world radically through the gospel of Jesus Christ, through peace and love. And another thing that I thought was quite awesome is how Jesus was definitely big on standing up for the oppressed in his day. I mean, we know he ministered to the Samaritan woman at the well. And then there was the parable of the Good Samaritan, where a Samaritan was obviously the hero of that said parable. And Dr. King, of course, was obviously very big on standing up for the African American community to gain their civil rights and take a stand against racial oppression and injustice. So those are a couple ways that I think that Christian principles were kind of on display during the Civil Rights Movement. So it's always kind of an interesting subject. Kind of moving on to the next question. How do you feel things have changed since the Civil Rights Movement? Do you feel that the gains from the Civil Rights Movement have kind of flatlined? Do you think maybe we have made even more significant gains? Or do you think maybe that the progress from the Civil Rights Movement has kind of been taken back a bit in recent years? What's your honest opinion on that?
My honest opinion, I think it can go like both ways. I think it can go both ways, mainly because like sometimes we're not perfect, we all make mistakes, like we just keep going forward, but sometimes we fall back 3 steps. But the important thing is that we learn to pick ourselves up, so that way we can learn from our mistakes and apply it to our lives, so that way we can work on not making a mistake again. With what's been going on in the world, it can go both ways, and the reason why I say that is because one side just wants to say Black lives doesn't matter, where the other side says like Black lives does matter. Because me personally, when with what happened with Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, George Floyd, their lives mattered. Like Trayvon Martin, he had the role, and he had a lot to offer the world. Same with George Floyd. Yeah, he made mistakes, but like nobody's perfect. But he didn't deserve to die the way he did. Or Trayvon or Tamir, nobody deserved to die like that.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you 100% on that point. And kind of reaching the fourth question, do you think that some in the American church downplay the success of the civil rights movement?
I'm not sure exactly. Maybe there is a possibility that some churches do downplay that. I can't say for like every single church, but I do know, because I do know, like one of the passages in the Bible says, "Beware of false prophets spreading bad things about God and everybody else." Like kind of like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Like you always want to keep an eye out for them because you never know where they're going to turn up and how they're going to manipulate the situation.
Sure, and I can say that in my years of being in church, I've noticed that some individuals within the American church today almost can borderline downplay the success of the civil rights movement because some have the perspective, unfortunately, that this world is never meant to be a better place and that it's only going to get worse anyway. So they think that protesting for against racial oppression and different things in our modern society is irrelevant because Christ is going to come back anyway and restore his kingdom for a 1,000-year reign. But I believe that Christ calls us in every season to be the light to this world and to show the lost that his love reigns supreme. And how are we going to do that if we don't let our light shine through our actions? That's kind of like my thought on it.
Yeah, that's a really good thought.
Absolutely. So I figured with that point in mind, this will be a good time to take a brief break, but thank you guys for listening to our show so far. I hope you're thoroughly enjoying this episode, but you don't want to miss segment 2. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everyone. So in part 2 of today's broadcast, we're going to be going in a little bit of a different direction and talking about one of the most successful films on Netflix called 13th. As some of you may know out there, the film 13th is a documentary about the racial oppression that's present in the criminal justice system, and the title was purposely chosen because the film articulates the point very well that the criminal justice system and the prison system has become the new proverbial Jim Crow, where systematically Black Americans are disenfranchised for life when they carry the label of being a felon. So in this segment of the show, we're actually going to be talking about the issue of mass incarceration and the tragic events surrounding the life of Mr. Kalief Browder. So this should be a pretty interesting segment. So, Brother Cecil, the first question I have for you regarding this matter is, first of all, do you think there is a race issue with mass incarceration?
Within like today's society, I think so. It just, for me, like, I know sometimes they often talk about it on the news, maybe not as much. I think for me, it's a little bit of a toss-up, like, yes and no. Yes, I think there's still, like, yeah, I still think there's a lot of like false arrests going on. And it's more usually on like Facebook videos. Like when you go on Facebook, you can click on videos, and you often see like you see black people often getting arrested. I was watching a clip on Facebook, and there's this pastor having church in his home. He got arrested just for having church in his house, and that took me completely by surprise. So I think it actually, yeah, I would actually have to say yes.
Okay. And the second question that I have regarding the matter is what do you think are some changes that should be made to the criminal justice system and the prison system in order to address this apparent issue of racism that's present?
For one thing, like the investigators, the police, they need to really watch they really need to watch the video, watch the video, look over all the evidence, make sure that they got every detail right, because they always go out and like, oh, that person did it. Like, I don't need evidence. I'm the cop. You got to do whatever I say. For them, they need to really and also just to be mindful of your surroundings, because I get, like, you're a cop, your life's on the line, just like it's like no different than being in the army. But when you're in the army or any other branch in the military, the minute you get called to the Middle East, you're going, but you just get called to your community, so you're serving your community. So you gotta, because like we the people, we are the community. God brought us together so that way we can unite everybody. And with cops doing what they want to do half the time, it's just like now, like, black people have a very good reason to be afraid of cops. Even most white people are afraid of cops, and it's hard to blame them. And like, we shouldn't be afraid of cops, but there's a good part of us that actually are, because of what we're seeing on the news and on Facebook.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely say that there is an issue of racism with the concept of mass incarceration. In order to really begin tackling any reform or change within the system, I would actually say that one thing we could certainly look at is possibly going after the police unions, because when you look at the matter, police unions are usually a body that protects bad policing, unfortunately, because with the regulations that they have in place, it's hard to relieve racist police officers of their duties when there's blatant misconduct and blatant aspects of racism through different avenues, such as body camera footage or vice versa. I would say reforming the police unions is essential for that. But also another thing is how the methodology of how prosecutors do things within the criminal justice system, because I think that they personally have too much power, and they resort to a good number of prosecutors resort to such bullying tactics to basically intimidate individuals who are facing the prospect of going to trial. They basically say, if you go to trial, we're going to tack on all of these charges, and they basically try to punish you for pursuing your rights. But then if you don't pursue it, they may give you a plea bargain for a much lesser offense just to basically get you out of their sight. That needs to change. As to what methods that would be done, I'm not sure how, but that would be an interesting dialogue for another episode. But I think those are a couple ways that maybe we can kind of address that matter. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely would say that's actually a good way, and also just to like it's one thing you caught you caught a criminal who really did something bad, but that there's more to it than that. And like you give him a deal, he may take that deal, so that way he doesn't do like jail time. He may just get like a misdemeanor charge for like something simple.
Right. And the bad thing with that is, even with that misdemeanor, that criminal record is still there. Even though that individual may not have committed a crime in the first place, that follows them around for the rest of their lives, unfortunately. And that's a big issue behind why some are saying that the prison system has become like the new Jim Crow, because if you have a felon label, you can't get food stamps, you can't get Section 8 housing. Basically, you're pretty much, any prospect of you getting a good job is pretty much shattered, and there's all sorts of disastrous side effects, and you can't even vote. There's a lot of unfortunate side effects to that, but kind of using that to go into the last question of this segment of the show. As you guys may know out there, there was a gentleman by the name of Kalief Browder who passed away at 22 years of age. For a little bit of background on him, he was an African-American youth from the Bronx, New York, who was actually held at the Rikers Island jail complex without ever being given a fair trial between 2010 and 2013. The bad part about that is, for 2 years of that imprisonment, he was in solitary confinement. And 2 years after his release, he actually eventually committed suicide because of the trauma that he faced. So Cecil, I just wanted to hear, what are your thoughts on what happened to Kalief Browder, regarding his situation? And do you feel even that maybe that's a major kind of symbolic event or series of tragic events that encompass what's going on with our criminal justice system today?
Yeah. What happened to Kalief Browder? That was definitely tragic and unfortunate. It shouldn't have happened at all. And you know, like he said, he didn't get a fair trial, and he should have, because like, you know, he was a black man, like, walking in Bronx, New York, and basically just minding his own business, and cops had no reason to pull him over. But the only reason they did that was because he was black. Like, wrong place, wrong time. He's a black man. We're going to arrest him. We don't need anything. We're just gonna throw him in prison for the next couple of years. And I couldn't even imagine like being in prison, even as a Beyond Scared Straight program. But I know for him, it had to be like even worse. And you didn't even do anything. And for like 2 years, you're in there, and then like when you finally get released, it's hard to. I know it's hard for him to handle it, and I think maybe he was scared to talk to somebody because, like, I don't know. I think he was scared to talk to somebody, not because of like not only what just happened, but he wasn't sure like how to handle it, and he thought that suicide was the only way out. And unfortunately, he chose suicide. And I don't even know if he was. I don't know if he was ever saved or not. Like, if he ever gave his life to God.
I'm not sure about that myself personally. My prayer is, of course, is that I hope that he did. And, you know, when I saw that story, in all honesty, I was fed up after hearing what happened to him. I was just in complete shock. And I mean, my blood as a believer was absolutely boiling, because I hate racial oppression and I hate injustice in this world. And it made me so frustrated of how the justice system completely failed Kalief Browder and his family. And I remember watching the documentary series that was, I believe, was on Netflix on Kalief Browder's life, and his mother eventually passed not too long after he committed suicide because because she had issues with a heart attack, and basically her family said she literally died with a broken heart. And eventually, you know, New York City eventually kind of came together and voted to close Rikers Island by 2026. But also, interestingly enough, it looks like the city of New York actually settled a lawsuit with the Browder family, I believe, for roughly $3.3 million. So at least something came out of it, but the damage had already been long done. And we have so much longer to go, I would say.
Yeah, I would definitely have to agree on that.
Absolutely. So, once again, guys, thank you for listening so far to the Reconciled Mind podcast. We're going to go ahead and take a short break, and we'll be back with a very interesting discussion on the concept of critical race theory and the 1619 Project. So you don't want to miss it. We'll be right back in a little bit. Alright, everybody, welcome back to the Reconciled Mind. So, in this segment of the show, we're actually going to be talking about the concept of critical race theory and the 1619 Project. So, first, I wanted to provide just a little bit of a definition. Critical race theory is defined according to the Encyclopedia Britannica. It's defined as an intellectual movement and loosely organized framework of legal analysis based on the premise that race is not a natural, biologically grounded feature of physically distinct subgroups of human beings, but a socially constructed or a culturally invented category that is used to oppress and exploit people of color. So basically, different social institutions have systematic racial bias as far as we can look back in history, according to this theory. And to give a brief definition of the 1619 Project, the 1619 Project is a proposed academic curriculum from the New York Times that began in August 2019, according to the New York Times website, to coincide with the 400th anniversary of when it was proposed that slavery began in what would become the United States. And what this curriculum seeks to do is establish the struggles of African Americans and put the issue of slavery at the center of the American history narrative. So this should be an interesting discussion in this part of the show. So Cecil, the first question I have that I wanted your input on is, what have you heard other believers say about critical race theory?
Not necessarily a whole lot. I just know like we as a people need to be more united. And I remember when Joe Biden, I think this was like right before he got elected, or maybe it was like right after, right around that time frame, he was talking about how he wanted all of us to be united, and I'm all for uniting people. We just gotta see like how we can unite people as one, because we were all created we were all created by God, for God, to be used by God. And he, like, our thoughts are his thoughts, and in the Bible it talks about how we are supposed to take every thought captive and make it obedient to God. That's something that my stepdad has always told me, and that's something that I try to do every time. I try to take every thought captive, make it obedient to God.
Sure, and I've in my studies, I've usually the common response that I hear other members of the American church in general say in regard to critical race theory is that it teaches others to it teaches people to hate one another simply because of their skin color. I've heard some say that all that critical race theory does is bring division, that it's not based on historical fact and is not accurate. I've heard of a lot of different things, but I feel that the aspect of critical race theory, or the central premise of it, is to just bring awareness or to brainstorm about the possibility that maybe there might be an inherent social or racial bias towards African Americans within different social institutions. So I kind of like to present both sides of the fence, but I kind of think that the concept itself is pretty interesting. But kind of moving on to the next question. Do you feel that the 1619 project curriculum should be the new American history curriculum, or do you feel it would be better to teach this equally alongside the history of the Pilgrims and the founding of America in 1776?
I think it should be like we should definitely teach we should definitely teach this generation of today like what actually happened like back then, like especially like how like the Pilgrims had their first Thanksgiving with Native Americans, and hence the day we celebrate Thanksgiving every November on a Thursday. I think it's usually around November 25th or 26th, give or take. But that way we can teach our children, our future grandchildren, their grandchildren, and so on. We can teach them like everything that we know about our history, like what with Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, what John F. Kennedy tried to do, and all the people that were all about uniting and having equal rights, especially for women, especially if you're a Black woman in that time you couldn't vote. I couldn't even imagine that. And I always thought, and the one thing I always thought about was like in the movie Back to the Future, where Doc and Marty went back to 1954, I think it was, to get his mom and dad to fall in love with each other. I always thought that would be pretty cool, like to go back in time and like to actually see the events that happened, especially which would be really cool.
Sure, absolutely. I'm a huge Back to the Future fan. I always wanted a DeLorean personally. I mean, I have a model of a calculator watch, like a Casio CA53, kind of like the model that Marty McFly wore in the film. And I also have a watch that's kind of like Doc Brown's Armatron model, that silver one. I was always a huge fan of just in experimenting with the concept of time travel and whatnot. I mean, I feel that. So just for clarification, so you think both should be taught equally alongside each other then?
Yeah, just so that way at least the generation of today has a little bit of an understanding, so that way when they're telling somebody else about it, they know how to present it. And that way they're not like, wait, what happened? Like they're not getting like thrown off or anything like that. Like this way they at least got an idea, and they can take what they've learned from us or from whoever has experienced the history of it, and that way they can learn from it and apply it.
Sure, absolutely. As I believe that both the 1619 project and the conventional American history narrative should be taught equally alongside one another as well, because I think as believers and Americans in general, I think that we need to be presented with both sides to actually examine the writings of that propose this history or show us this history ourselves, and to be able to think critically, because we should always be able to ask the honest question of whose history is being told. And I think being presented with both sides would really create a balanced curriculum and foundation to be able to really think critically about our history and what we should do as citizens today. So it's really interesting when you think about it. But kind of going to the third question, building off of that, do you think that critical race theory should be taught in schools? And if so, why do you think it should?
Oh, it definitely should, because black people have been targets for far too long, since basically into the 1600s until the present onto the present day. And our kids today, they don't fully understand like what happened, and like with what happened with George Floyd. Most kids do understand like what happened and kind of how it happened, but they don't fully understand like why it happened. So it definitely needs to be taught, so that way the kids in school, they can learn how to unite, like not just how to get along with one another, especially those of a different race, but how they can unite together. Because if the kids can do it, we can do it.
Absolutely. And I would say that and in terms of probably the Christian community in general, I would think we would probably be most likely in the minority, because I actually do believe that critical race theory should also be taught, not as the primary. I'm trying to find a way to word it the best way possible, but I don't think it should be taught like as the dominant like narrative over everything else. But I think just like how we were kind of talking about previously, it should be taught equally alongside other maybe methods of interpretation or history and such within our school system, because it encourages students, I believe, to think critically and let the students, of course, decipher the information for themselves. I think it's really important that we just be able to have an open mind and think critically about these issues. And kind of building off to the last question for this part of the show, do you think that the recent news coverage regarding the heated school board meeting in Loudoun County, Virginia, may be reflective of what may be going on across the country as a whole?
I think that it's possible that it could be what's going on as a whole, because I know you got a lot of people in that room. They were ready to. They were almost ready to throw the first punch within each other, and I'm just like, even though I'm just like watching that clip, it was just like, what, like, okay, I get that there's a lot of emotion, you're gonna be angry, I get that, but there are other ways to settle it. Like the first thing that they should have done was like, you know what, let's just take a break, like come back in an hour once everybody and everyone's regrouped, cool down, then we'll talk civilly. It's like, it's one thing if you're gonna have a disagreement, you can still have a disagreement and be civil, but the way both sides went about it, like, even though like the board did everything they could to try to keep the parents calm, I really think they really didn't do a good job of it, and that's on like both sides.
I agree with you on that point. I think that the Loudoun County school board meeting that has been in the news recently, I think it is a microcosm of what we may be expecting to see across the country, because the issue of gender identity and critical race theory being taught in our school system and such is going to be a very controversial and heated issue for the next number of years. And it's going to be interesting to see how things play out. But the important thing that I believe is just for us, as you pointed out very articulately, to actually just respond as Christ would in showing love to those who don't think the same way that we do, and just respond with the love of Christ. So that's very important, just being able to do that going forward. But thank you guys for paying attention to this segment of the show and for taking time out of your day to listen to us. We'll be coming back after a brief break with the last segment of the show. You don't want to miss it. We'll be right back. All right, everyone, welcome back to the Reconciled Mind. So in this last segment of the program, we're going to be talking about the concept of Black Lives Matter and the general trend we've seen with protests against racial injustice that have been taking place across the nation over the past year, beginning really in the early summer of 2020. And so this ought to be, this is probably going to be one of my favorite parts of today's program. So as you guys may have known, Black Lives Matter began, I believe, I'm just taking a look at the general history of when the movement began. The Black Lives Matter movement began as a hashtag in 2013 surrounding the events of the George Zimmerman trial and the shooting death of African-American teenager Trayvon Martin. And you guys may already know the history behind that particular trial, but it was a very emotional event, and it was very controversial. So social media began, there was a hashtag being spread across social media that just said Black Lives Matter, and eventually it evolved into a movement and eventually a decentralized organization advocating for bringing awareness to issues of racism within American society, and to advocate the central message that Black Lives Matter just as much as everybody else, not more than anybody else or anything like that, but it's to bring awareness to the fact that, you know what, Black Lives Matter too, and that's what we're trying to articulate to the United States and the world in general. So Cecil, I wanted to ask, so the first question I have for you is, do you believe that there's a difference between Black Lives Matter, the organization, versus Black Lives Matter, the movement?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if there is a difference, but when I first think of like Black Lives Matter, I think of like, just acknowledging that hey, these people matter also. Like, we're not the only ones that matter; they matter too. And of course, like when we say like God died for everybody, he died for every man, woman, and child of every race, especially for African American people. He died for all of us, and I really don't think there is. There may be a little bit of a difference that I'm not thinking of, but I do know that when it comes to Black Lives Matter, like not everybody's going to agree with it. Like, for example, I can say this was like, I want to say this was a couple of years ago. My son decided, my wife and I, we decided to have our son wear his Black Lives Matter t-shirt. And my uncle who's a former Navy man. I love him, but he decided to say something about it. Not on Facebook, but he decided to text me about it. So me being a father, I defended him because one, my son is also black. Two, my dad was black, so I'm like ripping him a new one. But I
Sure.
really think, but long story short, we're like as my son gets older, we're gonna be teaching him everything that he needs to know, and that's how we need to like how when you go out, you say yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am, and like how to respond to authority and how to respect them, and making sure that they make sure that like you earn their respect, they earn your respect, and also just to make sure that as long as you're doing the best job you can do, like I wouldn't even worry about it. Just as long as you know that that when it comes to Black Lives Matter, that of course like every person matters, every life matters, but also we're not taking African people for granted. And I think that's one of the things that's one of the many things that we are often guilty of, taking other people for granted.
I would have to say I absolutely agree with your point there. For me, I would say that there is a difference between the organization of Black Lives Matter and the movement of Black Lives Matter, because I feel that an organization is like a physical entity, if you will, that is comprised of different chapters in different locations across the country and the world, probably, and vice versa, with a set of specific principles. And the movement of Black Lives Matter conveys, I believe, a central message of what is being communicated. So I would say that the message of Black Lives Matter is of the message being that Black Lives Matter just as much as everybody else, and they hold the same value as much as anybody else. I would agree 100% with that message, and that Jesus died for everybody. Now, when it comes to the organization, for example, the organization supports the LGBTQ plus community and whatnot. As a believer, for example, I believe that the LGBTQ plus community should have the same rights as any American, and nobody should infringe upon that. But now, when it comes to matters of faith, I do, we as believers do believe that homosexuality is a sin, for example, and vice versa, and we wouldn't support that aspect of Black Lives Matter, the organization. But as far as the message of Black Lives Matter, of Black Lives Mattering as much as anybody else, we absolutely support that 100%.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely. So, what do you think about that point?
That I do agree, and I've also thought about, like, now that I have a son, it's like now, and of course, like, I don't know what the future is gonna hold, and I know when it comes to my son, I just, like, as he gets older, of course I'm gonna let him know, like, hey, like, no matter what happens, I'm always gonna be here for you because I love you, and when it comes to my son, I know, like, he's gonna do everything he can to make the right decision. Of course, I'm not always going to agree with his decisions, especially, like, say somewhere down the road, like, if he wants to be gay, like, me being a father and as a Christian, I'm gonna be like, no, because one, being gay is forbidden because it says so in the Bible, like, it's an abomination against God. And of course, like, I don't like, I know I get, like, we all want love, we all need it, we all strive for it. And so would I agree with his decision? No. Would I still support him because he's my son? Yes, of course I'm going to support him because he's my son, but I'm not going to agree with his decision. So for me, that's something I worry, like, like it's something I don't fully worry about, but it's more just like when that time comes as he gets older, it's something that I need to tread very carefully because I don't want to say the wrong thing and have him like do I don't want to say the wrong thing to him or anybody else and like and oh I just started a gay race war or anything like that. No, I want to give my honest opinion and let them know like I may not agree with their decision that you want to be gay, but I do get that you want to be loved by somebody, and I'm all about love. Like we're all about love, and I may not agree with their decision, but as a friend or as a son or daughter, I support you, and that's just my point of view.
Sure, absolutely. So, kind of moving on to the next question, uh, do you believe that Christians can and should participate in peaceful protests involving Black Lives Matter? And do you believe that Jesus himself might participate in marches and peaceful demonstrations?
Oh, I think Jesus would be the first one there. There's no denying that. And as far as like us participating in a peaceful protest, I for one don't have any problem with that as long as like hopefully as long as like everybody's been vaccinated. But overall, I would say yeah. Like if as long as it's peaceful, definitely protest. Let them know like you're gonna do everything you can to make a difference.
Sure, absolutely. And personally, I believe that there's no issue with we as believers in Christ being involved in peaceful protests because as believers, we are called to oppose um, oppression and to spread God's love through standing up for the oppressed and articulating a message that God is a God of justice, of course. And I do believe that Jesus may, in fact, participate in marches and peaceful demonstrations because he was the biggest advocate for standing up for the oppressed and the poor and other minority groups and such. So I would say he would be right there. So I would agree on that point very much 100%. For the third question, do you feel that Black Lives Matter, in terms of their values, is in line with some Christian values? And if so, what ways do you believe that this is reflected?
That's a good question. I would, I, I think so. Well, I mean, of course, like God has called us to love one another as like just like God loved the world so much that He gave His one and only begotten Son to live among us, to be there for us whenever we are in over our heads or something serious happened and of course like He did everything and more for us and he took our mistakes up on the cross. He even said, God forgive him because we don't fully know we know what we're doing, yes, but not fully understanding but not fully understanding it. And when he said it was finished, that's when he died. And then that's when his soul went to heaven for 3 days. And then he came back, rose from the dead, and he went to go see his mom and then the disciples. So I think it does have a little bit to do with it.
Sure. And I would say that the Black Lives Matter movement does have some commonalities with Christianity because their central message is standing up against black oppression and racial injustice in our society, and Christianity espouses very much that same concept in standing up for the oppressed and helping to provide for the poor and disadvantaged groups. Now, I don't feel that their stance on the LGBTQ plus community aligns with biblical Christianity, but no organization or movement is perfect. And there is some common ground that kind of where the Black Lives Matter movement and biblical Christianity find in common a little bit. But the very last question that I have for you as we get ready to close out today's show: in what ways do you think the Black Lives Matter movement and the Christian church can learn from one another?
I think there's a lot of ways we can learn from each other. Mostly it has to do with like who's gonna. It's gonna be more about like who's gonna present it. Sorry, I can't even talk.
No problem.
I think there's a lot that we can learn from each other. Especially when it comes to like Black Lives Matter and like us as Christians, because God has called us to go out and disciple unto the nation, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Ghost. I know for us, that's something that we like not just talk about. That's also something that we back up as well. And for the Black Lives Matter, they it's like their views are like similar to ours. Yeah, we're not always going to agree on everything, but I really do think that that we can learn a lot from different people from different races, especially in the Black Lives Matter movement. And I also think about like we were to time travel, like say back to the 60s, like maybe a few years before Martin Luther King was assassinated. Think about what we can learn from Martin Luther King, from Malcolm X. Like it would be phenomenal, to put it in the least.
Sure, and if there's anybody who I'd like to be able to see speak live and in person, it would be none other than Martin Luther King Jr., because he's my favorite all-time preacher, just because of how he did his best to show the love of Christ in fighting against racial oppression and injustice to help African Americans win their civil rights across the country. And I believe that Black Lives Matter as a movement and the Christian church can learn from each other in a number of different ways. First, I believe we can learn from each other in how we communicate a message to people. I think we can learn from each other so well in that regard, because I feel the way that a lot of churches communicate something versus the way the Black Lives Matter movement might communicate something might be two completely different things. And as we all know, communication is key. Secondly, I believe that we can learn from one another of how we can understand our respective struggles from the Black Lives Matter movement and within the Christian church, because the Christian church, deals with issues of issues of racism, unfortunately, still in our 21st century world. And of course, Black Lives Matter fights for the racially oppressed and for bringing a message to light. But I believe we can learn from one another just of if we can come together and have a dialogue and just learn what the other side has to say about different issues within society, if that makes sense. And lastly, I think we can learn how to love one another. I think if we were able to sit down and have an honest dialogue, I truly believe that a bridge would be established where we'd be able to learn even more of how to love one another, which is absolutely the central premise of Christianity, because Jesus himself said, love your neighbor as yourself and love your neighbor as I have loved you. That's the greatest commandment. And I believe that that's a significant aspect of how we can learn from one another. What do you think?
I agree completely.
Absolutely. So I figured that would be a good time to just bring today's show to an end. So Cecil, I just want to say thank you for being on the show today, and for all you guys listening out there, thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to what God put on our hearts. And as usual, you guys are an absolutely awesome audience. So perhaps we'll be back together again one day down the road, not too long from now. So as usual, thank you for tuning in, and may you guys be blessed. Thank you for tuning in. God bless you all.
Same to you.